All right. So, welcome to the Saturday morning call. It's Friday afternoon, Friday evening in the U.S. Uh, so, today um, we're going to start talking about Salayatana and basically what to do about it. Michael, can you mute your microphone?
Yeah, sorry about that. I got a happy child here.
All right. So, what is Salayatana? The word atana actually is the Pali word for senses. And the salayatana would be internal senses. Now, there are a few suttas where internal and external is mentioned that way, but in most places in the descriptions of the Paticca it uses the word salayatana, which actually translates easily enough into an internal sense. Now, basically, what that means is that we take an external sense and internalize it. We bring it home, we bring it in, and in that bringing it in, it's also going through a filter or a process. And that filtration in the Pali is known as Namarupa, and it also translates into the word perception. Now, Namarupa basically means then the Rupa is the external sense, and we name it, which makes it an internal. Now, we go through that process. In fact, all animals go through that process. Another way of saying the process is recognition, to recognize. Now, what that means is that we have seen something like it before, and that we're using our old understanding or our old image to try to make sense out of the current image. An example of that, by the way, would be English language. You've got the English language stored, and even as I'm speaking, you bring that English language up word by word and then structure by structure in order to understand what I'm saying. That in reality, all I'm doing is making sound waves. But the sound waves have that language built into it. The eyes, by the way, do the same thing in the sense that all that anyone can ever see with the eyes is shape, color, and movement. And all the recognition then is done through the process. And when we come up through the process called perception, so you can to come up with an internal representation. That means then that the process of perception, using the eye as an example, means that the optic nerve and much of the back part of the brain, as well as other parts of the brain, are all used to take shape, color, and movement and turn it into an internal image of understanding. That's the Salayatana. This is how we make sense of the world. Now, the reason that the Buddha would talk about it is because that process has got problems. That process is not very good. For instance, if I started speaking Russian to you, you wouldn't have Russian language as part of your uh, memory base, and so you would not be able to recognize what's being said. And if some of the words that I'm using in English, if you don't like them because you've been told by either NBC or some church or another that that word is bad, then when you hear that word, you'll get stuck on it and maybe not hear anything else. All right. And so we have words that we have favorites of liking and not liking. And that generally then interrupts the flow. And so the Salayatana then can be said that it's a story that we tell ourselves. And the story is about reality. And then that story, the Salayatana, that internal sense, is what we make of the world. That's what contacts us and creates feelings. In other words, reality doesn't impact us, not at all. The only thing that impacts us is our interpretation, our recognition, and the story that we tell about it based upon our past. That's about all there is to it, except that how do we use that information in practice? Well, in fact, if we begin to understand that what we're trying to do is to understand, and we often miss. It's like two ships passing in the night, they don't even see each other. So, we're trying to make sense of the world on a regular basis. In other words, perception is a process that's so deeply buried into the brain system that it is always in operation. Even when we're asleep, perception is there. An example of that would be the cell phone rings and it'll wake you up, or that a mouse bites you on the finger, that's going to wake you up. Both of those things, by the way, happened last night. And that we kind of keep that perception system going even when we're not conscious of it. So in fact, the Salayatana is there even if it doesn't impact us or it doesn't contact us. And sometimes the contact will get through. And so this is why contact is known as part of the process of Paticca Samuppada. It's not just that we make up the story, that story has to impact us before we have any feelings about it. But if we don't have anything that we're perceiving, if we just take raw input and don't make anything out of it, then the story is pretty short, the contact is pretty light, and the feelings are pretty much not there, not at all. And so this is why the Buddha says that we should, in fact, begin to notice our perception, to notice how we make stuff up. That in fact, we actually make up our entire existence based upon old memories. That we don't live in reality, that in fact it's not possible to live in actual reality. That take an example of a tender infant. A newborn babe doesn't know how to make much of anything. He could hear that bad word that the Christians hate, and he wouldn't make anything of it because he hasn't stored that word as bad in his memory banks yet. But if he's in a Christian household, he will soon enough. Probably the first time he uses it. He's heard it before, he doesn't know what it means, and he says it, and his mom's going to make sure that he knows all about it now. So then the child stores that bad word in his memory system. Now, the word for memory system is in the Pali, They call it Sankara. Now, the word Sankara is easily understood by using the word memory system. But unfortunately, it got translated in the old days and still has that connotation of a concoction or something that's put together. But if you understand it as memory, then you can see that, yeah, we concoct a memory system. Now, the memory system that we concoct, by the way, was already also filtered. It went through perception into Salayatana. It contacted us. We had a feeling about it, and then that feeling system is then stored as the Salayatana, ready for use next time. So that's all there is to Salayatana, except we should begin to figure out what to do with it. Now, the first thing that we begin to understand is that it's flawed, it's faulty. It does not have the ability to process all of reality. Reality is really, really huge, and human knowledge is quite small. An example of that would be how many world languages are there? And we get all surprised when somebody knows 5 or 6 languages. Some people really world class would know 30 languages. However, how many human languages have ever existed? 1 million? Especially with all the dialects in India. They have 14 major languages just in India, and that you can go from village to village within one language, and they don't understand each other. So, in just that regard of languages, reality is vast. It's vast, it's big, and our ability to perceive and understand reality, put it through our filter, coming up with Salayatana, winds up being quite small. And so if you begin to see and understand and open up to the reality that it is so huge that it's well beyond our understanding, then we can cope with it that way. But a lot of people, they don't like to not know. And so they spend all their time studying something that may not be of any value other than it prevents them from having to feel bad because they don't know. Well, Western society is very, very much hung up on making sure that the children know. They give them exams in school, ask them questions, and so every child that's raised in Western society is under the impression that they should know all about it, and yet they don't. In fact, one of the recent things would be physics. That here we had Sir Isaac Newton, and that he put together a lot of stuff. He invented calculus. He did a gravity thing. And then Einstein came along and found out that Einstein was wrong. I mean, Einstein figured out that Newton was wrong about gravity. And so he expands it, makes it bigger for the understanding so that it fits reality better. But over time, the physicists have been making stuff up, calling that physics. An example of that is Big Bang. They don't know whether there was a Big Bang or not. And then, in fact, now after the physicists believe that, they've got the James Webb telescope that's kind of proving that, wait a minute, we don't really know what happened, but it wasn't the Big Bang. And they don't like that at all. But in fact, one of the problems with physics is that while we had physicists who could go into nature and try to understand it from human terms, like Newton and Einstein a bit, Now, most of the PhDs that are in physics, they're not physicists. What they are book readers. And they read all about the physics that somebody else came up with. And so they're hard pressed to come up with something new on their own. The same thing actually happens with philosophy. You know, philosophy in its beginnings was designed to answer the stupid questions that the Catholics made up. That was the source of it. And that all of the old philosophers, hundreds of years ago, maybe up until 100 years ago, spent their time trying to figure out the answers to questions that were irrelevant. But then something happened. Philosophy was moved into the classroom. It was moved into universities. And now all the philosophy university students are not philosophers. They read books about old philosophers. That's all there is to it. In other words, their Salayatana and their Sankara has gotten a bit ossified. They're not making anything new. There is really no new philosophy. That in fact, the last good new philosophy was Spinoza, who came to say that the nature of God is just reality, it's just nature. They didn't like that at all. They wanted God to be something special, something unique, and in fact, something quite small. But Spinoza said, oh no, it's big. It's so big and so vast that we'll never quite understand it. We'll never grab a hold of it and have it as ours. If you can understand that from both physics and philosophy, you can begin to understand it as each one of us live out our daily lives. We are constantly running across some new reality that we don't know, and it doesn't fit into our memory base. So what we do is we invent it, we take the reality and shove it in, we perceive it, we make a story up that fits our understanding. In other words, most of our lives, most people go around living a life telling themselves a story that they made up. And they are confused thinking that that's reality. So, what do we do about that in practice? Well, one thing is to remember that we make all that shit up. And almost always, when we make it up, we put some label on it. You've seen clothing that says made in China, and they put that label on it, made in China, or made in Indonesia, made in America. But very few of us go around putting a stamp on our own internal reality, said, this shit's made up right here. And we don't recognize that we're making stuff up. We think that what we're doing is we're seeing reality, where in fact we're just making stuff up, perceiving it as a story. So one of the things that we can do then is to begin to see, first off, that most things we don't know. We're not sure about a whole lot of stuff. There is just so much out there. I remember, in fact, that Ajahn Chah had become famous for the statement of not sure. He also had another famous statement of so. In other words, he would leave the Salayatana open, never come to a close, never come to a statement of I know this, but rather would come to, yeah, everything is incomplete and we're not sure. Ajahn Po, with me, used that term not sure quite a lot also. So with both Ajahn Chah and Ajahn Po using that word, it probably came from Bhikkhu Buddhadasa. But I don't know, not sure. So if we can come to that point, we can recognize that it's not mine. We automatically label it as this is mine. An example of that would be people will watch the news and see the Republicans, and they'll either say, that's mine or that's not mine, because mine is the Democrats. And so we have a lot of people, most of the Americans, in fact, will take on an identity. That's part of the Salayatana. They make up a story, and the story that they make up is, I am a Republican or I am a Democrat, which means then that every time that anything happens to the Democrats, the guy who labels himself as a Democrat, he has to own that. It's him. But if we can come to the state of recognizing that, yeah, the Democratic Party exists because there's a whole lot of people who claim themselves to be Democrats, but when they're claiming that, every Democrat has a different idea of what a Democrat is. And so every Democrat is unique. They call themselves Democrats. The same thing with Republicans, by the way. There's not one Republican Party. There's 20 million Republican parties. There's no U.S. government. There are 300 million U.S. governments, or probably more. Why? Because everybody's got their own idea, and that they own that idea, saying this is the way that it really is. That's reality. Where in fact, actually what happens is that they made that up and called it reality, when in fact it was just a story. It was just the internal Salayatana. It wasn't external, didn't exist in reality. If we can start to remember that, then we'll begin to see the process that we use to make stuff up. Begin to evaluate your ability to understand. Begin to watch yourself perceiving, making stuff up. Because if you can begin to see yourself making stuff up, you'll have a better chance of just forgetting about it, that you don't have to make it up. Or if you do, you'll take a second look. You'll go get more information. You'll look a little deeper and look and look and look and look before you come up with an answer. Sometimes the answers, the correct answers, take 1,000 years to come up. In fact, that's what's happened with physics. They've gotten first off to Schmidt, and then they had the Hubble, and then they had the James Webb, and they still can't see it correctly. They keep looking and looking and looking and looking, but they haven't been able to figure it out yet. Well, if the trained scientists are that way, look at other kinds of science. I mean, how many doctors from how many thousands of years, from the shaman and the shakers and the witches, etc., down to modern medicine, and yet they still don't know. They're still researching. They're still trying to figure it out, and they still haven't figured out the body. They've done some things, but a lot of the stuff that they figure out, they wind up having to go visit a second and a third and a fourth and a 19th and a 20,000th time. If you can recognize that that's the way it is, let's begin to remember to keep looking, to keep investigating, and stop coming up with conclusions. That's the problem with the Salayatana, is not enough information. We don't have it stored in our Sankara base. But most people will jump to a conclusion. They'll see one little piece of evidence, and then they think that they know all about it, and they'll jump on it. They own it. It's theirs. And then they're in for a big surprise someday soon. And that's where the bad feelings come from. It comes from, in fact, inaccurate information. But here's the magic part, and that is that if you don't trust your own Salayatana, you're a whole lot better off. Because if you don't trust it, you'll keep investigating. And if you do trust it, you're soon you're soon to screw up. So this is actually what the Buddha means, in the sense of this is how to practice, is beginning to look at our perception. Now, how do we do that? Well, in the very beginning, we begin to look at thought, and we recognize that thought's just a thought. In fact, a thought is, in fact, a salayatana. And we begin to look at them and recognize that most of the thoughts that we have are unwholesome, because we made that up based upon unwholesome sankharas. And so we start to change our sankharas, making them more wholesome and more wholesome. We have to lay on layers, because the old layers basically are full of unwholesome old thoughts. Like, mommy, 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 please help me. We do that when we're 2 and 3 years old. Mommy, 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 come help me. And then they wind up being an adult Christian, go around saying, mommy, 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 they mean God, please help me. If they had seen that mommy, mommy, mommy doesn't really help them the way that they wanted help, then why should they go around asking God to help them when God's not going to help them even as much as mommy did? So this is the problem, is that we store an awful lot of, let us say, wrong information in our memory base, and therefore come up with not so very good stories that we tell ourselves. This is the way that it happens. So another point is that as you begin to understand that that what you do understand, the stories you made up, may not be actually real. In that regard, now what Michael was talking about earlier would be that it's not mine. Stop owning our salayatana. Stop believing that what we make up is real, because it's not real. It's just a made-up story that we have. And as we continue to practice, we can get actually closer and closer to reality, simply because we're looking and looking and looking at reality without making up any stories about it. So this is the way that we would practice, is to remember to look, and to remember to look. Now, the one thing about looking is that that's not all there is to it. In fact, that's the problem with a lot of meditation, is they look and they look and they look and they look, but they don't actually make any changes to it. They keep looking at the same old salayatana, and it's still the same old salayatana, because they haven't made any changes to it. And so the teaching of the Buddha then comes to the point of saying that, yes, once you begin to look and you can see that this stuff is unwholesome, what you can do then is start making changes. Let's start adding some new sankharas that are closer to reality. And as we continue to practice, things get closer and closer to reality. And the reality is that you don't own reality. It's not yours. And so there's some phrases that we can begin to use, such as not me, not mine. Buddhadasa had the phrase of, nothing is worth clinging to is I, me, or mine. And what is he talking about? He's talking about the stories we make up. We think that we're dealing with reality. In fact, what we're really dealing with is our own version of reality. So there's another one that we were using for a while, NMB. NMB, not my business. Whatever I've thought up, whatever I don't like, is really not mine. It's not my business. So when you see a cop arresting somebody, you can say, oh, that's not my business. And yet most people, when they see an arrest, they want to make it their business. They want to pretend to be a lawyer. They want to get their camera out. They want to do something or another. They want to make it theirs. That's where things get really complicated, is when we try to make things our business rather than just leaving reality on its own. Reality can take care of itself. It doesn't need your help, especially since your version of reality is probably screwed up. So it's better to start leaving things alone. Not my business, not my problem. If we can live our lives that way, we can be very comfortable and very happy. But if you make everything your business, you're going to live a pretty frantic, unhappy life. And the only point about that one is that everything that we hear, everything that we see, we tell ourselves a story about it, and then we say, it's mine. I own it. But if you're practicing correctly, you begin to say, wait a minute, let's take another look. Let's make sure. And then we come to the point of, wait a minute, even if I can make sure and make sure and make sure, I'm still not sure. I've just done a whole lot more evidence gathering. And so if we can begin to live our lives as, I'm not sure, it's not my business, and even so, everything is okay. Reality is actually quite nice all by itself. The problem with reality is that people keep looking at it and thinking that it needs to be fixed because of their own salayatana. They make that stuff up. Everything bad about the universe, they make it up saying, oh, I can fix that. And so they own it. That's the problem, in fact, with modern physics is that the physicists love their stories about the reality of nature rather than continuing to study nature. Philosophers, same thing. They are in love with their stories about philosophy rather than just dropping all that stories and start observing reality. So this is how we would practice, is begin to remember to look and to look again and to look again. And when we see things that are, let us say, dissatisfying to us, we can make a change to that so that we can become satisfied. We don't have to change the outside world. What we need to do instead is change our attitude about it. If we can begin to change our attitude towards everything is okay, everything is fine, then we can have a happy life. But most of us are trained from childhood to look for problems, and boy, do we find a bunch. Boy, do we find a whole bunch of problems. And then we start to worry and fret, and we don't even know. So, this is the way that we would begin to practice, is by beginning to understand that we make up a lot of stuff, and that stuff is often wrong. And if we made it up and it's often wrong, then why do we want to own it as if it were reality when in fact it's just a story that we made up? So, Alex, what do you think about Salayatana now?
I like it. It's a very good, helpful way to look at things so that we can let them go.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very nice little cribs notes or whatever you want to call it. A good way to remember to look.
Mm-hmm. Yes, to look at it and recognize that we made this story up. So then we can begin to look at the process that we go through of making stuff up. We can begin to see our perceptions. We can begin to look at reality and then see what we made of it and see that process of making something out of it.
Yeah.
And
And
that
like you
will
said,
then
it's
become
something
freedom.
deep, yeah?
So freedom is actually the freedom from the feelings that we have about stuff we don't know. And so we made up a story about it. If we stop making up stories, that's real freedom.
Hot dog.
So, Santiago, what do you think?
Basically, I listened for like the 20 minutes and then I got caught up on something else. I'm sorry. So you
So
can
you've
say,
been making a bunch of shit up while we were talking about it, huh?
Huh? What? I guess I don't have good insight or looking into things.
All right. Wakey, wakey. Pay attention. Ben, what do you think? Ben Don. We have another Ben. There's Ben.
Ben Don's here.
Okay.
Yeah.
I liked it. Thank you. I guess my question would be the speed from the sense contact to getting lost in the bullshit we tell ourselves. How quickly, where, when to put in the not me, not mine, if ideally straight away. But
Well, first off, the Buddha said that the mind, oh monks, is fast. It is so fast that the Buddha doesn't even have an analogy for it. Well, since then, the physicists have come up with concepts like milliseconds, microseconds, nanoseconds, and things like that. But those kind of concepts are not really useful. What really will happen is that as you begin to practice and begin to see the thoughts that you have and begin to change those thoughts and begin to see more clearly with reality, eventually by investigating, by looking, by making changes and remembering to do these things, we begin to speed up our process so that we can begin to see things happen faster. An example of that would be the student comes in for meditation, and then he tells the teacher, "Oh, I have anxiety." And the first thing the teacher asks him is this anxiety new or is it old? The student will have to think about it and says, "Yeah, well, it's kind of old, but it really comes up when I'm meditating." And the teacher will say, "You know that the anxiety that you have, the feeling of anxiety, came from some thought that you had. That's basically paticca samuppada. We only have a thought, and that thought contacts us into feelings, and now he's feeling anxiety, and he missed the fact that he made that shit up. He wasn't watching." And so as we begin to practice more, we can begin to see that our anxiety, we made that stuff up. And when we start having more wholesome thoughts, the anxiety will dissipate. But things happen pretty fast in the mind. We're talking about under a half a second. You can go from seeing something, like you can see a letter in your mailbox, and before you even open it, you're feeling bad. You just noticed. So an email comes in. You don't even know what it is, but it's got Microsoft on it, and automatically you feel bad. So this is how we can begin to recognize that we made stuff up before we actually read the email. We make stuff up, and then that contacts us, and we're not even aware that that connection had happened. This is where experience in practicing meditation begins to cease that, oh, yes, I feel that anxiety, and I know exactly what thought I had that gave me that anxiety. And so let me make sure that that thought that I had was just a bunch of crap. We don't know for sure. We're not really sure. So why am I feeling anxiety when it's not time yet to feel anxiety? I haven't even opened that email yet, and I'm still feeling anxiety. So this is the way that we do it is that we practice, and as we practice, we can get faster and faster so that we can begin to see the kind of thoughts that we have that lead into the feelings that we have. Does that make sense to you, Don?
yes, thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, Ben Woolley, what do you think? Ben, there you go.
All good. All good. Thanks, Dhammarato. It's great to be able to see things clearly instead of making up stories. It's a lot more freeing. You can relax, chill, no problems.
All right. So start watching that you make stuff up. As you practice, you're not going to make stuff up so much. There's 10,000 things that you can have anxiety over, but if you start looking at your process of making stuff up that creates anxiety, that anxiety will go less and less and less and less because you can see how you're making the stuff up that makes you feel bad. So, Michael Swift, what do you think?
I think this was a good talk. It was very enlightening. It's all made up. I agree.
All right. Michelle, what do you think?
Hi.
Hi.
No, it's really, really helpful. And yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm engulfed in the big story, like continuously about what I feel like I need to accomplish. And even though I know that it doesn't matter, it's still, I think when I think about it, I feel like there's like a fear of emptiness without the story, which I know you kind of have to just give into. But that's what it feels like. Without that story, there's an emptiness.
Well, that's exactly right. In fact, what you can say is that once you make a story up and you see that you made it up, that fear comes. And so we want to make up more stories to get rid of the fear, as opposed to seeing things correctly in the sense of, I made up a story and now I fear filter because the story may not be true. We can say, aha, isn't that marvelous? I don't have to feel bad at all. I do not have to accomplish anything. You're already okay, Michelle. That's what you need to tell yourself, that you're already, that's the true story, is you're already okay. You don't have to accomplish anything, and you don't have to make up stories in order to feel okay, because when you make up stories, you wind up not feeling okay anyway. So the best thing to do then is let's start making up some wholesome stories. The wholesome story would be everything's okay, everything is fine, not a problem in the world. Oh, wow, what a relief it is. This is how we practice the teaching of the Buddha, is to start having wholesome stories. And pretty soon we can see that it's all made up as a story. And I don't even have to make up stories anymore. I can just feel okay.
Exactly. Thank you.
Yeah, everything is already okay. So, Santiago, welcome back. What do you think now?
I think that's great. We switched to Microsoft Teams, right? And my sync contacts had my ex's number in it, and I accidentally texted it. And she's like, "What do you want?" And I'm like, "Oh, it's an accident." And she said, "Yeah, I'm sure it was, you prick." And I'm like, so I got caught.
But you can see that she made all that up.
Yeah, I mean, it
wasn't. Are you going to own it?
Huh?
Are you going to own it? It's mine. I'm the prick.
No, I'm already good.
All right. Anybody else got anything? What do you think, Alex?
I think it's great. I always have such a good time on these calls. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Dhammarato, so much. Thanks, Mikey.
So, Michael, why don't you take this thing home?
All right. Yeah. Thank you, friends, for being here today. As people have kind of mentioned, Microsoft is bringing Teams to an end. So or they're bringing Skype to an end and replacing it with Teams. We're still playing around with that, but if you'd like to join these calls, you can always find the relevant links in the YouTube description of Dhammarato's YouTube channel. So as soon as we have everything set up, we'll have the links posted there. And if you have any issues getting connected to these calls, please feel free to reach out to me. You can contact me on Skype, Teams, Discord, and of course, OpenSanghaFoundation.org. So yeah, thank you very much, everyone, for being here.
Right, exactly. So let's start the transition now. We're not going to have any calls on the team, but you should make sure that your contact list has got as many people on it as you can. Start testing it, sending each other messages, just a test message or whatever like that, to make sure that it's working correctly, so that when we make the transition, it'll be a smooth transition. All right, and so the best thing then to do is today, download Microsoft Teams. Make sure that you can log in with your Skype account, and then start to move your contact list into Teams. Okay, so Micah and I will be trying to figure out more about it. We'll talk to you later about it. If we find something that needs to be said, we'll put it on one of the Skype groups. All right. Well, thank you all for coming. This has been a nice call.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dhammarato. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy your
And just remember
day,
one
night.
last thing, and that is everything you've heard today, I made that shit up.
Thank you.
Enjoy.
Bye,
And when you heard it, guess what you did? You made your own shit up.
That's right.
All right, guys. See you later.
Take care, everybody.